Down to business.
That's the nectar of the gods, baby.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Whiskey Musings broadcast. I am your host, Rick. You know, I really wanted to avoid this. I kind of didn't want to go down this path, but you know, some things happened this week, in especially in terms of the news, and I think that at least some people haven't necessarily seen it. And so while I normally don't do like current events, I mean, I have done a couple of shows where I've kind of mentioned things that have happened. Tonight's show, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about a couple of things that popped up in the news that I don't think everybody may have noticed. Because realistically, I mean, here we are, we're a couple months away from, you know, one of the biggest elections, I think, from either side, regardless of who you're voting for. We've got a couple of really big election. This is a huge deal for elections, and that isn't what tonight is about. But because of that, because of the fervor with the elections and the fervor with some of these cities and protests and riots and looting and things like that, whatever you want to classify them as, I think there's a couple of things that have slipped through the cracks that that the mainstream media may not have picked up on, and it's something that I think is really kind of important. So I wanted to bring it up. I wanted to talk about it tonight. I will say this much, that if you are watching with young ones, this may not be the topic that you want to necessarily have them in with you. I normally try not to like curse or anything like that, obviously, and not that I'm saying that this is a family friendly show, because it really isn't, but I think this particular topic is something that depending upon where it goes, who calls in, that kind of thing, it could be a little sensitive for some people. So consider that kind of your warning ahead of time. I totally appreciate if you have to bow out on the live stream and want to listen to it or watch it later. I totally understand. But it's definitely something that I think that as far as that goes, that you should consider with caution. Just this is a little bit more sensitive than what most of my shows are about. So if you have to take off, I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming and wanting to listen, but you know, this one's going to be a little bit on the sensitive side. So I'm going to give you a second to go ahead and figure that out and do that on your own. Otherwise, for, you know, those of you that are the adults in the room and you still want to keep going and watch, or at least find out what the topic is about beforehand, I understand. I completely understand. So that being said, so one thing that I've seen pop up a lot on Facebook in particular has to deal with the hashtag Save Our Children. And there seems to be a lot of conversations about things like trafficking, human trafficking in particular, but also having to deal with the children trafficking as well. And a couple of things popped this week in terms of the news, and so I wanted to kind of bring them up and talk about them a little bit. This is going to be a little more controversial than my normal topics and that kind of thing. It's just something that I feel really that we should bring up, and it kind of ties into an episode that I had done a couple of weeks ago, where I was talking about the potential social degradation and its evidence in our things like our music. And in this particular case, we're dealing with a little bit more than just the music. And the main topic or the main thing that kind of triggered all of this was, for those of you who are unaware, the state of California just ratified or enacted into law. Maybe it's not quite 100% clear yet, but they just put into law a controversial amendment to an existing law that talks about, in particular, sex offender registration. And the funny thing about this particular scenario is that the sex offender registration originally, and I'll just kind of bring this up here. So the original wording basically left a little bit for the judges to kind of get an idea of, if they felt that somebody really, this was like, let's just say kind of like a Romeo and Juliet kind of scenario or something along those lines. The judge had a little leeway as to whether or not they were going to require somebody to register as a sex offender. Now, the funny thing was the original writing of the law was specifically towards male and female and not towards, not necessarily towards the same-sex partnerships. So this gentleman, who his name is Senator Weiner from California, decided that he wanted to amend the law. And the way that he went about doing it, I think, is the way that he went about it, I think, was kind of counterintuitive to where I believe most of society might want to go. The thing about it is that what he did, so there was an exemption in the original law that made it to where if it was male and female, and as long as their ages were fairly close together, they could go ahead and the judge could go ahead and say, you know what, I'm not going to have you register as a sex offender. But when it came to the same-sex side, especially male to male, it specifically stated that they had to register as a sex offender. And so it was this particular piece that this senator decided that he wanted to try and correct. Now, in some cases, or in part of the case, what you could have done, and I think this probably would have not sparked as much fervor had he done it this way, but what he could have done was rewritten the law in such a way that it made it to where it didn't matter what it was, as long as it was some type of sexual act with a minor, that they would immediately get on a registration. And he could have gone that way. But what's interesting is that he decided not to go that way. He actually wrote the law or put forth a rewriting of the law that made it so that it wasn't just exempting the male to female, but essentially making it so that if it was same sex, that they would have that same leeway, that same exemption as what it would be the other way. Now, a lot of people, they look at this and they think to themselves, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like, oh, well, what's good for one side definitely has to be good for the other. But the challenge, I think, realistically is mainly because of the way that the law was actually worded. And so while I'm not a lawyer in any way, shape, or form, or any sense of the term, what I am, though, is I am a concerned individual, and I am also a parent, and I need to be able to understand, or you need to be able to understand, that this is what I would consider kind of a gateway type of scenario. And it's not necessarily a gateway. It's kind of like people talk about, marijuana being a gateway drug. Okay, so, you start with marijuana and then all of a sudden you move on to harder stuff. And now I don't know whether or not that's true. I'm not a doctor. But what I do know is this, that if you open up the door, even just a little bit, to something that the potential of the problem where you release the Pandora's box, in terms of figuratively speaking, where you open up the Pandora's box, it becomes a huge problem when you're dealing with trying to put things back. And I honestly believe that this particular law is going to be an open door, or a potential opening of the door to what could be considered even further potential issues down the road. So let me kind of read to you what the existing law sort of says. And this is, I'm taking this from the actual California legislature's website, and this is the Legislative Council's Digest. Okay, so under the existing law, and I'm quoting now. The Sex Offender Registration Act requires a person convicted of one of certain crimes as specified to register with law enforcement as a sex offender while residing in California or while attending school or working in California as specified. A willing or a willful failure to register as required by the act is a misdemeanor or a felony depending upon the underlying offense. So that's the way the original law is, kind of a synopsis of the original law. Now, I can tell you from stories that I've read, from news articles that I've read, that people have gotten into it a little bit further, that essentially it really is less inclusive toward the same-sex side as it is to like the male and female. But here's where the problem comes into play. And so here's the digest, and I think this is part of where some of the issue comes into play. But here's the Legislative Council's Digest on the change that would be required. So the change coming in, it would be this bill would exempt from mandatory registration under the act a person convicted of certain offenses involving minors if the person is not more than 10 years old than the minor, and if that offense is the only one requiring the person to register. So now let me kind of break that down in terms of the way that I kind of view this. So think about this. So first of all, they're basically saying that a person who commits this offense would be exempt from mandatory registration under this act, this change, if the person who is convicted of certain offenses involving minors, so this is specifically pointed toward people under the age of 21, if the person is not more than 10 years older than the minor, and that if the offense is the only one requiring the person to register. So if there's other offenses that require the person to register, they still have to register. But if this is the only offense that they did, that they have a potential of being exempt as registering as a sex offender. So now I think the biggest problem that everybody is kind of having is, first of all, this is in reference directly to minors. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that they have added a stipulation that as long as the person is within 10 years of the victim's age in particular, that they could be considered exempt, provided this is the only thing that they've done. So what a lot of other places have kind of gone and determined, and by places I mean other news outlets, other agencies who are a lot more knowledgeable than I am in terms of the law, have determined that for an example, if there is somebody who is 14 and the offender, who's the victim, and the offender is at least earlier than the age of 24, so that 10-year span, that offender very well could get off without having to register as a sex offender. Now, I don't know about you, but that kind of bothers me, because realistically, the first thing is that you have to deal with the age of consent. So, there are other factors, and I don't necessarily want to blame this law, but the simple fact, and I'm not really looking to like hash out the law and its constitutionality and all this other stuff on the show. But the question that I have is, first of all, why would anyone consider any kind of law that would be looking at exemption for someone to do something like this to a unconsenting minor, that you would be allowed to not register? I mean, think about that. This opens up the door to where the judge can make a decision on whether or not they want to allow or they want to basically impose the punishment of a person registering as a sex offender. As long as this is the only offense, and as long as they are within 10 years of this person's age, and on top of that, as long as this is consensual. Now, I don't know about you, but I know that young children, in my mind, they can't even really decide, in most cases, some major key issues because of things like maturity and that type of stuff. So in my mind, I would think the age of consent wouldn't be as low as 14, but that seems to be in California's best interest, or the way they have it set up. So as long as it's consensual, it's not like instances of, for an example, instances of rape, why they would even try and exempt, never mind. Anyway, the point is that, why would you, first of all, why would you even expound upon that to get it 10 years? 2, 3, maybe 4 years, I could kind of understand, but 10 years is a big problem. I mean, somebody that is the age of 14 and they're within 3 years, that would make it 17 to 14. Okay, I could maybe see it. That could kind of fall in the idea of like the Romeo and Juliet type of scenario. Okay. I mean, at least it's somewhat plausible that these were just two kids that didn't know what they were doing and they kind of got together. But anyone over the age of 21 or even over the age of 18, which is the legal age of consent to do a lot of things, such as you're considered an adult, number one, that you can go off to service and that kind of stuff. In some states you can own a weapon at that age. So to me, it would kind of be, I would think that they would have added something, but the more disturbing fact is the fact that this is even being discussed, that this is even being presented, and a quote course correction is even put on this. Because that's what this senator is basically saying. He's saying that, well, if you exempt it one way, then you go and you exempt it this other way. And we want to put this exemption in. And it passed. It passed. Without any back and forth. It passed. And so this ties into my other episode in terms of the degradation of society. I mean, I don't understand where these people are getting from. Now, I mentioned that this could be a gateway, and it could be. It very well could be, because right now there's a couple of things that are really on the ballot here, or on the issue here. The issue number one, where this could be a gateway, has to deal with the fact that, first of all, that's a 10-year span that they've put into law. So they've agreed that anyone from the age of 14 to the age of 24 is allowed to be exempt from registering as a sex offender, provided that this is the only offense, and provided that there wasn't any other crime. Like, for an example, this is consensual. So, just think about that for a second. You have a person who is over the age of 21 who is able to do things under the wording of this law. Now, whether or not this would actually, play out this way in the courts, I have no idea. But under the wording of the law, it's basically making it so that any individual who consents to this contact is making it so that the person who is the perpetrator is not required to register as a sex offender. Now, whether or not they can get convicted by other things, if they get convicted and sent to jail, that's fine. But the fact that they're not tagged as a sex offender is a bit disturbing to me, because again, this is an opening of the door. This is an opening of the door into what could potentially be a wider issue when it comes to things like sex trafficking, and especially with minors. Now, that being said, I mean, I don't know if there's a lot out there in terms of people who have doing hashtag save our children. And the funny thing is, in the Facebook world, they've been talking about how you don't say save the children, because save the children actually ties to a Bill Gates Foundation or something like that to donate money. So the key is that you have to use the hashtag save our children in terms of this particular topic dealing with sex trafficking directly. Now, again, I'm a little disturbed only from the standpoint of that they decided that nobody, I won't say nobody, but very few people appeared from the outset, from the outside, to argue that, hey, instead of doing this, let's flip the other side of the law and make it actually where everybody just registers as a sex offender regardless. And some states do that. I can tell you that right now, that some states do have that. Regardless of the offense, you're automatically registered as a sex offender. But just thinking about the idea of this law, and now you have tied into this law the Jeffrey Epstein case and Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I believe so. You tie that together with this law, and it kind of makes it's an interesting coincidence, let's put it that way. And here's something else that's interesting that you may not have missed, or that you may have missed in the news, in the fact that the U.S. Marshals have made a couple of key cases. They have rescued a large amount of children from sex traffickers. And this popped up. This is the USA Today. This is a USA Today article where it talks about the operation's name is Operation Not Forgotten, and the U.S. Marshals rescued 39 endangered children in Georgia. They arrested 9 suspects on basically sex trafficking charges. Now, you see this and you juxtapose this with that law, and you kind of sort of scratch your head and wonder, what the heck? Where are we going with this? Where is it that we have people who are going out and picking up these sex traffickers, and yet we have laws that are being passed that are trying to exempt sex trafficking, or at least sex offenders of minors. And so this kind of leads me into the whole concept of where our society is sort of breaking down, that we're getting worse and worse as we go along. And the more things that kind of happen, I mean, it's bad enough that we're dealing with things like child trafficking. I mean, I can remember being a child and being able to just go wherever I wanted to go, ride around on a bike. We didn't really hear about people getting abducted or anything else. But now, in today's day and age, you hear about it almost every day. And with social media, it makes it even more prevalent because of the fact that you're seeing posts from people who are basically looking for their loved ones. And it seems to be showing up more and more. Now, I saw a stat the other day, or I saw a chart, and I couldn't find it for the program, but it basically pointed out how much a child can get from traffickers. And in America, it was like $30-something thousand. I think it was like $32,500. I mean, think about that. It's a money-making operation. And this is really scary. It is scary not only for parents, but it's also scary to even think, just in a general sense, where have we gone with our world that this stuff is occurring here, and we can't even go and do anything about it. And then you have people getting off because of laws like California, where they may have gone to jail, but then they come out and they're no longer registered as a sex offender, or they don't have to register as a sex offender, and they go and offend again. Because the amount of recidivism, yeah, that's a big word, recidivism in this particular sector of society is pretty large. I mean, in comparison, when you think about the heinousness of the act. Another thing that popped up here too was that the U.S. Marshals, in conjunction with the earlier one of the 39 in Georgia, they picked up another 25, at least 25 missing children in Ohio. And this is one that's coming from Fox News. It's a Fox News article. And this one, the U.S. Marshal Service Operation Safety Net recovers 25 missing children in Ohio in its first 2 weeks. So there seems to be a very large crackdown on this, but it also makes you wonder and makes you think about what is this country coming to where things like this are happening. You can't even have your kids, go and enjoy their outdoors. You had that one child that was killed, was basically shot in his yard. I mean, what is it about children and about the crimes against children, and what is it about our society and a breakdown in something that has caused this to bring this stuff to the forefront and make it a little bit more prevalent in our society? Now, we can blame social media. I mean, we certainly can. The access to almost instantaneous information is definitely going to have an effect on the movement or the information getting to individuals. But the reality of it is that you really need to think about is there might be a systemic problem with the system and the way that we either go about child crimes, the way that maybe it was always here. I don't know. Maybe it was. But again, it just seems like a lot of things have sort of targeted and happened, especially within this past week or even the last couple of weeks, where, we're starting to see more of a normalization of some of this stuff. I mean, I can remember a few years ago, the whole thing with the Catholic Church blowing up. And that was like just amazing to everybody. And I'm not condoning that in any sense of the word, because, I mean, to me, a crime is a crime is a crime. I mean, you are doing things that are evil, and you must be punished for it. But, just from the small bits of information that we're getting, it seems to be that the amount of this type of crime is on the rise. And this is something that we need to be aware of, not only in our society, but also dealing with the laws. And again, I bring up this whole normalization of violence and the degradation of societal norms in the past. Because another thing, I mean, dealing with children was having to deal with, there's a recent law, it's being fought in the courts here in the state of Washington to try and teach sex education to kindergartners. And, again, it's just these little tiny bits and pieces, these little tiny things that change. And you think, oh yeah, okay, you could make a case for something. But it's a small erosion, a small bit that just gets taken away. And then it's another small little bit that's taken away. And then it's another small little bit that's taken away. And pretty soon the entire elephant is taken away. And this is sad. This is really, really sad. So then there's another, let me see. This one. So I had another article up here, but yeah. So this one is in reference to the Georgia missing kids as well, or sorry, the Ohio missing kids and the Georgia, both of them. So apparently law enforcement is really starting to focus on this. And so I don't know if you've ever noticed, but I mean, it takes a lot of money to do these operations, a lot of manpower and everything else. And so if you see things like this coming out, it's because of the fact that the law enforcement personnel have decided to focus on things like this. And I know that there's stuff out there. There's organizations out there like Veterans for Kids, I believe it is, and they go and they help try and track down predators, online predators, and things of that nature. And I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, there are a lot of things that happen within our society, and especially with all of our kids being tied to our phones and everything else. And there's apps out there like TikTok, for an example. TikTok was really big in the news a few weeks ago, having to deal with the fact that Trump wanted to ban TikTok. Well, then all of a sudden Microsoft said, you know what, we're going to go and buy TikTok. And I can tell you from experience, from personal experience, the kids love it because they just go and they make little 5-minute videos or whatever. They put it on TikTok. They get likes. They get what they consider adoration and everything else. And this is a potential door opener for where children get preyed upon, because you don't know. You really don't know who is on the other end of that line. You don't know who is on the other end of that screen. It could be somebody young. It could be somebody old. You honestly do not know. And, I think that a lot of this stuff kind of leans in toward the idea that, again, our society is degrading. It's degrading quickly in some cases. There are certain cases. And just to allow something like that law to pop into place is immense to me, to understanding what is happening in today's world and today's society, and the lack of responsibility, the lack of accountability, and the lack of just general good sense to understand that certain things you just shouldn't do whatsoever. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the phone lines. So if you're interested, you can give a call. Again, the phone number, if you're just listening and not really watching on the YouTube or anything like that, it is 360-309-0997. I do have 3 lines available. So if anybody would like to call in and discuss this, but I'm shocked and amazed at how much, especially in the last, week or so, that things have really kicked off. And here's another interesting, not really a correlation, or sorry, it might be a correlation, but it may not necessarily have causation. But it's kind of interesting to think about that Ghislaine Maxwell has been in custody for a while, and then all of a sudden we start seeing all these rings, these child trafficking rings getting taken down. It's an interesting, well, let's just call it just a very minor coincidence, maybe. But it does make you wonder, especially because the Jeffrey Epstein case, there really hasn't been a lot in the news about it. In fact, I tried to look it up, and there really isn't that much there, other than, for an example, the judge has delayed questioning some people and, that kind of stuff. So they're kind of delaying the trial a little bit longer. And I don't really understand why. And I'm sort of stepping into an area that I'm not exactly fit to discuss when it comes to things like the law and order. I'll leave that to my friend Addie on her channels and things like that. I'll leave that to her to kind of discuss, because she definitely has more knowledge in that sense. But it just seems interesting to me that we have, this big, huge arrest. He ended up, they say he committed suicide. Don't know that for sure, but he ended up doing that. You've got his girlfriend arrested, and now all of a sudden we are getting a whole bunch of high-level arrests on sex traffickers. So, all I can tell you is that those kinds of things seem a little too coincidental to me. And I think that there is something else going on, and part of the distraction that you have with things like the election coming up and all of the things that are going on there, plus all of the other stuff. I mean, our world, if you look at it, is just, it's something totally different. At least here in the U.S. is totally different than what we have ever really been, I think. Maybe not so much in terms of, you can't classify it, honestly, you can't classify it as part of like world wars or anything of that nature. But just the fact that we have so much going on that even the news outlets can't keep up with all of it, that it does make you wonder what can be occurring in all of this, what can be occurring to make a lot of this occur, or what a lot of this stuff happen here and everywhere else. Now, I will say that I did hear, I don't know this 100%, but I did hear that President Trump does make child trafficking and human trafficking a priority for his forces. And it looks like that is the case because you have the U.S. Marshal Service that is going and doing this. So, the U.S. Marshals are federal, and they're the ones that are making the case out of all of this. It's interesting that it's not the FBI, it's the U.S. Marshals. So even that's kind of a curiosity too. And that might, lean into some of the things like some of the questions that we are having with Bill Barr going into and investigating with the FBI and some of the stuff that has come out about, the Russian probe and all these other things. And it's, when you lose faith in your police system and your policing system, it tends to leave a lot of people lost. When you lose faith in things that you believed were without a doubt tried and true, without fail, it tends to leave people lost. And I think that might be some of where, a lot of people in this country feel right now. I know that there are some things that I find a little odd and strange and outside of this, and this just seems really weird that California ended up deciding to make this law. And I mean, you can make all kinds of jokes that you want about Californians and that kind of stuff, but the thing about it is that it's very, very odd that they would loosen up the restrictions rather than try and tighten up the restrictions on some things. And just the timing of it and the timing of the finding of the kids and that kind of stuff, it just all kind of sort of fell together, and it made it come to the forefront. Now, that being said, if there's anything out there that you think that you can do, I mean, I know some people, or I've heard of some people that have been, going and like helping to flush some of these predators out and that kind of stuff. But, you also have to consider too, there's been some suggestion that masks make it easier, because you look at a child. There was a post the other day that I was looking at on Facebook where how quickly it took, I think, 3 minutes to transform essentially a little girl into a little boy, in terms of changing her appearance in such a way that she looked like a little boy. And that fell in with like things, for an example, the mask by itself, just flipping the mask inside out and then adding a hat and then tucking the pajamas up into shorts. I mean, it can happen so quickly, and what you're looking for can change so fast. So I can see where some of this stuff might be occurring more often because the opportunities are getting better and better in terms of being able to hide the child and be able to hide yourself as the perpetrator even better because of some of the other extraneous things that we have going on in the world or in the country today with things like masks and that kind of stuff. So, I was just abhorred by the idea, honestly, that somebody would even consider, expanding not only the time, but also loosening up restrictions. But we also see that happening in a lot of other senses too. So, letting people go from the lawlessness in some of these cities, letting people go without charging them, going around and letting criminals out of jail because jails were supposedly unsafe to their health. And it's very interesting to see how this has changed. And again, this goes back to my original assumption in terms of how things like this change or are contributing to our delinquency in society, where standards are no longer being met. And it makes it interesting. The societal standard is changing. Lawlessness is becoming more of the norm, or at least it appears to be becoming more of the norm. And it makes you wonder if there are other components, if there are other components that are contributing factors to this. I mean, I saw a disturbing video online about this man was walking down the street, and this kid came up behind him and hit him with a brick or a rock or something, knocked the guy out. He fell flat on his face. I mean, I don't know about you, but most people do not fall forward without trying to guard their face in some way. And this guy flat out just crashed to the pavement. And it makes you wonder, why have we gotten to a point in society where somebody can go and do that and, of course, put it on YouTube and videos? I mean, I've seen, people going through and they're like shoving older people around and stuff like that. So, it makes you wonder, what's the contribution factor to the lawlessness and the degradation of societal values that allows for this stuff to happen? And it really does. It makes you wonder. You sit there and you scratch your head and you seriously take a think and a look at all of these things that are going on and how all of this, I mean, you could say whatever you want. You could say this is toward the end of times if you're religious and follow the Bible. You could just talk about all kinds of stuff with this, but it is disturbing, period, from me, and I just can't understand why a group of individuals who are supposed to be our elected leaders, at least in this particular case for the state of California, who have not done what they are supposed to do, which is protect the American people, protect the innocent. That's what they're there for, is to make law. I mean, laws are designed to protect people. They really are. People and property and that kind of stuff. Laws are designed to protect these things. And until we get back to the idea of a law and order society, I think you're going to see more and more of this stuff. You're going to see more and more of these angry mobs, these, people doing bad things to other people, but these, all of these things. And then you go so far as to understand that there's some people out there who will not go quietly. And, a gentleman got killed in Portland. Early reports say he was gunned down, but this is, first of all, why anybody would do that. I mean, it looks like he was gunned down in potentially cold blood. I'm going to let the law handle it to determine whether or not things are going on. But I mean, just a few years ago, you wouldn't have seen that. Not that I can recall anyway. And by a few, I mean like 10 years. But this is disturbing to me, and it's an indication to me in terms of the lawlessness of society. And back in my other episode, I was talking about how our music can influence our propensity to allow this stuff to happen. I mean, common decency is disappearing at a very fast rate, and you have these individuals who are out there and glorifying. You have songs that are out there that are glorifying the gangs and that kind of stuff. You have the thug life and the thievery and everything else. I mean, this is all being glorified in our society, and this is sad. This is seriously sad. I am very, very sad in looking, and this is kind of a depressing topic, I will admit, and this is not my usual topic, but I felt compelled to come out and talk about this because of the fact that a lot of other things in this world might be covering some of this up. So do me a favor. I mean, from a person to person standpoint, do me a favor and maybe start looking around, start paying more attention to your surroundings, especially when you're dealing with the potential areas where, children might be picked up or whatever. When you're, going off to like Walmart or something like that, pay a little extra attention around. And I'm not saying to necessarily get involved, but just pay a little bit more attention to what's going on, because I think what you might find is that there may be a time where you're in the store and you see a child who is not in the right place, or at least doesn't seem to be. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. And somebody should say something about that. Somebody should open up and attempt to do something, because, kids being abducted every day, and you hear stories of it where there's children being abducted. And it's not just children. I mean, there's other people too that are getting abducted too. But people are disappearing at an alarming clip, and and I would highly recommend you look up, if you have any interest at all in this, look it up online. There's maps that show hotspots, where these places where things are happening, and it seems to be prevalent obviously around cities, but it's also prevalent in certain areas of the country that you may not think about. But pay a little more attention to what's going on around you. It's not only going to save you, but it's also going to save others. It has the potential to save another life or another human being. So, pay attention, watch, help if you can. If you can't, at least be able to provide information to the people who can help. And hopefully, maybe, someday in the near future, we'll be able to go back to the life or the world that we used to know, where you could ride down the street on your bike. You could drop your bike off in the front yard of your neighbors as a kid, and you could go there and hang out. I think and I've got a couple of chatters here. Somebody posted that there's no respect for human beings anymore. And this seems to be the case. I mean, now, I'm not going to say this is the case everywhere. It really isn't. I mean, people, there's so many good places that you could go and that kind of stuff. But if you're watching the news media, they are designed to do one thing and one thing only, and that's sell sensationalism. So you can't necessarily believe everything that they do, because even the most mundane topic can be sensationalized by utilizing the words. And most people only read headlines. And so this particular thing, in terms of, some of the stuff that's out there, we've got to watch. We've got to pay attention to what's going on. And don't just take things at face value. Whether you're out dealing with the public, or whether you're watching the news or reading a newspaper, don't take anything at face value, because this is not the world that we live in anymore. Trust is gone. Trust really is a very small commodity, and that is gone. And it's a scary thought. I mean, you couldn't even imagine what trusting people would be like, but we've gone away from it as a society. And again, I'm pointing out this particular instance, and the acceptance of some of the songs and the music, and the acceptance of all of this stuff in terms of degradation to society in some way. And it's not that it affects everyone. So keep in mind, it's not that it affects every single person, because it doesn't. It affects people differently across all platforms. And just because the music has a certain word in it or something like that, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a bad thing overall. But it is, again, it's a doorway. It's a gateway. It opens the door to further things. And it's the whole concept of even like a slippery slope idea, where you start at the top and you do just the smallest thing, and then next thing you know, it's another thing, and then another, and then another, and it just goes constantly down the road, and you're down the rabbit hole to go to these places. So this is something that I really believe in. I really think that we need to take a look at all things that are going on here. We need to pay attention to more than just things like whatever happens to be the hot topic of the day. You have to look beyond some of these things. You have to look beyond the headlines. You have to dig into the stories. You have to really and truly get into the information in order to understand what is really and truly happening in this world. And I wanted to bring this up only from the standpoint of, this is our society as it stands today. And if you allow things like what they did in California to stand, and it goes against all engagement to even think, just think about that for a second. For 10 years, allowing 10 years difference between the victim and the perpetrator, it's beyond me to understand how that could even be thought of as a proper bill or a proper situation to be able to be written into law. It just is beyond me. And what's even worse is that it could potentially have slipped by the wayside because we're so distracted about all these other things. And I'm not saying that they're not important. I just think that there is more things that are important in today's day and age than just what you see and what you read on the top line of the newspaper. You got to start digging a little deeper. We've got to start thinking for ourselves, thinking beyond just what is in front of us, and look beyond, become more observant, become more ingrained in our society outside of ourselves. There's so much stuff going on that may not affect you right now, but it very well could down the road. Child trafficking, sex trafficking, human trafficking, any of that stuff, that can affect you. That can affect you directly. And it's something to watch. It's something to watch. Anyway, I'm about out of time, and nobody else really called in. So I hope you like this message. I know this was a little bit deeper than normal for me, but I felt that it was very important to bring it up, very important to watch, because, again, I think there is a lot of focus on things like, what Trump said or what Biden said or what Biden didn't do and what Trump did do and what, all of this stuff that's going on. But sometimes it's the missing things, the things that are missing are the stuff that you really need to pay attention to and you really need to watch for. And some of these smaller articles that get pushed to the wayside because there is some sensationalism elsewhere, that's stuff that we might need to kind of think about and focus on, because I don't know how often I can tell you this, but you slide one thing through by just not paying attention. And next thing you know, it's going to be even more. Like I said, a little bit here, a little bit there, piece by piece by piece, and next thing you know, the whole pie is gone and you have no idea what the hell happened to it. Anyway, if you like my program, if you like the vodcast, I'll call it, then definitely please subscribe on YouTube, follow me or follow my page on Facebook, follow on Twitter. I will be back here next Saturday. I do appreciate all of my subscribers. I appreciate everybody that joined on Periscope TV, on Facebook, and on YouTube. Help me out, make this thing a little bit more. If you like what I'm talking about, you like what I do. And again, don't forget, you can always drop me a line. You can drop me if you have a thought on a show, if you want to talk about something, definitely drop me a line at the email address is Rick, R-I-C-K, at whiskeymusings.online. That's Rick at Whiskey Musings. Whiskey Musings is all one word in lowercase, .online. You can send that to me there. You can drop it on the Facebook page. I think you can also comment on Twitter, but wherever. Just if you have a comment, if you have a suggestion for a broadcast, let me know. Otherwise, do me the favor, let other people know that I'm here and I'm broadcasting. If you like the show, you like the topics that I talk about, help me out by subscribing. I really do appreciate it. Everybody have a great Labor Day weekend. Here in the U.S. anyway, we have Labor Day this weekend, where we have a holiday on Monday. So have a great Labor Day weekend, and I will see you next Saturday on the Whiskey Musings broadcast. Good night, everyone.